Walking up to the scene, we have a young lady's head smashed in.
A woman found dead.
The trauma she endured must have been unimaginable.
When 3 potential suspects are identified, the finger-pointing begins.
Do you know why we want to talk to you? No, I didn't want any part of it.
Did not know anything else. I swear to God, this sounds like something out of a movie.
But first, a serial killer on the loose for 16 years.
This individual is going to strike again.
Until detectives catch a break.
We kick into panic mode because that's our one shot to interview.
Investigators searching for answers.
How many have you killed? I want him to know that I already know the answer.
In the interrogation room.
He grabbed his soul and, broke it open.
Santa Fe Street near the railroad tracks in East Dallas. We find a strangled Hispanic female there who's had her clothes torn off of her. They swabbed her. And all of the swabs tested positive for the presence of seminal fluids. They were able to collect a suspect DNA. When you look at something like that, you're thinking that this girl has been killed because of a sexual assault.
Her mother came forward and identified the victim as her daughter, Maria Perales. We started to learn a little bit about her, that she was very outgoing, she was adventurous, friendly. They also added she had been working at a nightclub as a waitress, as a mesera. Here in Dallas, there are a lot of clubs that are referred to as taxi dancer clubs, as a mesera. Their job is to keep the clientele in the bar, sitting down and having drinks with them and dance with them. What we initially found out was that she had left with a Latin male in his 20s.
Medium height and medium weight. It's super vague. It narrows it down in Dallas, Texas to about, 400,000 people. The call was on a dead body that was found at a construction site.
She was hidden behind mounds of dirt that were there. She also was left partially nude.
She was wearing her high-heel shoes still, I can recall that. Her back was exposed to the sun, and it had actually burned some of her skin. She'd had her clothes pulled off, and then had been used as a ligature to strangle her.
This individual was identified as Olivia Hernandez. She was 23 years old at the time.
She loved her children, her 2 daughters. She would do anything for them. She was a waitress working at those clubs, and that was why she was working, because of them. She wanted to have a better life for them.
You've got 2 women, they're both unclothed, they're about the same age, their appearances are relatively similar. We're immediately suspicious, okay, this could be linked.
The profile that I was building in my mind was that we had a serial killer on our hands.
To me, it's a waiting thing. We've requested the DNA comparison, and it's only a matter of time before it comes back in. After the DNA results come in, that confirmed it. This is the same killer.
Six months passed. A year passed, and this individual did not strike. Was he gonna hit again? I felt that he would, and it was just a matter of time.
The victim was found at a garage. She's displayed on the hood of a car after having been brutalized by someone. She's completely naked. The victim's name was Veronica Hernandez. Again, she worked as a taxi dancer.
There it was. We realized that he was still out there. We were looking at the same individual. There's no doubt in our mind.
Yo tenía 11 años cuando pasó lo de mi mamá. Mucho nos dolió. Ese fue el peor día de mi vida. Era la mejor madre. Y una mujer muy trabajadora que sabía sacar adelante a sus hijos.
What I miss from my mother is feeling that touch, that she's next to you or around you or showing you that love and affection. I think that's what I miss.
The media made it run like wildfire, and an anonymous caller called in a tip that this particular suspect that he had seen with this third victim was actually wearing a mechanic shirt. And on the shirt, he had his name, Jose. And sure enough, there was an individual in that shop named Jose where the body was found. And that's how we ended up with Jose Cifuentes on our radar. Once Salas came to the homicide unit, and it was my responsibility to take him under my wing. I also learned that Detective Salas spoke fluent Spanish.
Jose Cifuentes, he was a 21-year-old. I think I was 26, maybe 25. I mean, we were not far off. He said he was from Mexico. I'm like, hey, I was born in Mexico. It kind of breaks the tension. And there's something that connects us. He told me this sob story that, man, I wouldn't hurt a fly, I would never kill a chicken. He would say, I don't know Veronica. And I say, well, you know, people are saying that they saw you with her. I was just saying, hey, tell me what happened. It was that cat and mouse, you know, game, see how much you know. And I said, you know what, I know you took her. He finally told me that he took her to that shop. He said, she fought. And he said, I silenced her. I went and told the lead detective, hey, this guy just confessed.
The results came back, and there had been a positive match done and connected between Cifuentes, Perales, Olivia Hernandez, and Veronica Hernandez.
We want to bring him in and see if he'll talk to us about the 2 prior murders.
The problem was that after Cifuentes had been jailed, he turned around and made bond.
At that time, the bond was set at $100,000. To me, it's kind of low. All you have to do is post 10%. So his sister posted the bond.
I inappropriately assumed I had the luxury of time. So we go back to an investigative mode, and we're looking for the guy. His sister tells us he's fled back to Mexico. Spent a lot of time looking for him, but not finding him.
Three dead women, all strangled. I don't care if they were living in Dallas, Texas, another state, another country. That's a serial killer who's free. And so, the urgency to, locate, identify, and ultimately remove the danger from the world, it's high.
And then here, years later, homicide detectives think they have found this guy, Jose Cifuentes, on Facebook. He created a Facebook page. It seemed implausible, but it was the truth.
FBI and Interpol and the folks down in Mexico City put together a surveillance team. He was arrested on, never forget it, April 25th, 2019.
It's been 2 decades, and if we can put a familiar person in front of him, he's more likely to divulge information.
You go and have a seat.
He's being escorted by our SWAT team. The first thing I say, hey, take all the handcuffs. And I told him. And I wanted him to hear that. Take the handcuffs off. And right there, I'm trying to establish that I don't feel threatened by him.
We're excited, but, kind of kick into panic mode, because that's our one shot to interview. And someone who's killed and killed repeatedly does not come in and confess all their sins. So I needed that to happen.
José.
Sí.
¿Cómo estás?
Bien.
¿Te acuerdas de mí?
Sí.
You have to gain their trust. And one of the best ways is see if you can give him something. And I gave him the picture of his wife. Traigo una foto. It usually builds rapport.
¿Cómo consiguió esta foto, Lee?
Leak. That is the short term for licenciado in Spanish. A licenciado, it's somebody with a title. So it was like, I respect you.
Gracias, Lee.
The reaction to the photo of his wife was instant. It was like, from the minute he walked into the room, Juan Salas, he reached into Cifuentes and just grabbed his soul and, broke it open.
Fuiste a Monterrey, Monterrey es grande.
Ajá, sí.
¿A qué área?
A San Nicolás de los Garza.
¿Y ahí qué hacías?
Ahí vivía y trabajaba en un taller.
¿Y luego después qué hiciste?
Y luego, pues, ahí cometimos un delito y ahí me encerraron en el penal del Topo como 8 años.
Me imagino que fue unos 8 años bien largos.
Fíjese, nomás un custodio me miraba. Me dijo, no, él me dijo, yo sé alguien que te puede ayudar. Y yo dije, ¿quién? Un abogado. Dijo, no, Dios, pídele. Y
¿Ahí fue donde comenzaste a ir a la iglesia?
Ajá, antes cuando salí de Apodaca, en el 2014 ya ya traía, ya hablaba yo con Dios y todo.
Creo que como creyente nomás hay uno que puede juzgar.
Dios.
I am a religious person. I believe in God. And so we're speaking the same language. And that was the key, trying to get him to tell me more about himself, to open up more. José, si yo te preguntara, ¿cuánta gente has matado?
Pues que le diré.
No hay nada encubierto delante de Dios.
Sí, sí hay. Ahora he comprendido que el que encubre sus pecados no prospera, Lee.
Eso está en la Biblia. Me acabas de dar decir. ¿Cuánta gente has matado, José? Y yo creo que esta es una oportunidad de uno reflexionar y ponerse bien con Dios. Y ser honesto, porque yo creo que eso suelta el alma.
Me libera todo, Lee.
Y el Señor dice que confesado vuestros pecados con Él.
Ay, me siento bien mal, Lee.
He's at the tipping point whether should I tell him or not. If I just push him a little bit more, he might just tell me the number. Or say, I want a lawyer. And at that moment, you lost your chance. You can feel the truth. You can almost probably touch it. And I am trying to convince him that, go ahead and tell me.
Está mal.
Tú sí sabes cuántas has matado. Dame la verdad. Tú sí sabes. ¿Cuántos? It wasn't a question, it was more an affirmation. How many have you killed? I want him to know that I already know the answer. Pero yo quiero hablar del 98.
Ah, sí, una chava de la...
¿Qué pasó?
No, pues esa salió de un bar y la seguí.
Ok.
¿Verdad? Y ya, pues, le pedí que tuviéramos relaciones y pues sí dijo que sí, ¿verdad?
Ah, ok. ¿Tuviste ahí relaciones?
Ajá.
¿Y qué pasó?
Y ya después como que... pues yo le dije que le iba a pagar y le dio coraje que no, ¿verdad?
Ok.
Entonces empezamos a discutirle, ¿verdad? La agarré de aquí del cuello, ¿verdad?
Ok.
Y pues la apreté, ¿verdad? Hasta que se asfixió. Y ya después como que pasó eso, me asusté, pues agarré el carro y me...
So, tú más o menos en tu mente sí sabías que estaba muerto.
Sí, sí, sabía.
I remember the day, I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it. You work on something that long, and to have it culminate in that way is a tremendous feeling of accomplishment.
Okay. Después de esta, ¿pasó otra vez?
Ajá, otra vez. Era de mesera.
¿Y qué pasó esa noche?
Igual y pues hice lo mismo que con ella, ¿verdad? El coraje.
He confessed to it. This is how he did it. But I'm trying to find a motive. ¿Por qué te daba coraje? ¿O qué pasó? Porque tienes relaciones con ellas. Ayúdame a entender. Quiero saber qué está pensando José. ¿Qué siente?
Como odio hacia ella.
Yo quiero entender por qué tenías ese coraje contra ellas.
Mi madrastra de chavo pues nos trataba muy mal.
Okay.
De hecho nos golpeaba y todo ese... Y ahora lo entiendo, ¿verdad? Y pues sí me arrepiento, Leo. O sea, es como usted dice, le agradezco que Dios me lo haya puesto otra vez en mi camino. y hablar con la verdad porque...
No, aquí estamos hablando la verdad.
Sí, me arrepiento por todo lo que he hecho. Le pido perdón a Dios.
Sí. Jose Cifuentes, he killed 3 people, and he confessed to it. That's the icing on the cake, because I knew that he was facing minimum 3 life sentences. He's not coming out.
I do not believe he would have confessed to anybody else. There was just such a deep spiritual connection between these 2 men, and we got exactly what we needed. Veronica Hernandez's daughter gets on the stand and looks at him, and her eyes kind of explode. And she points at him and she says, "I remember you. You were at my mother's funeral."
He estado ahí, en las últimas bancas del funeral. O sea, algo que te quita tu mamá, todo el tiempo vas a tenerlo ahí. Eso nunca se te borra de la mente.
When you're a homicide detective, you don't get to choose your victims. Your suspect does that for you. I'm going to see to it that she matters, that we all matter. And good homicide detectives, you don't quit.
Sometimes, as a detective, you carry with you some of these cases because you weren't able to bring closure to them and bring peace and tranquility to the family. After 20 years, the justice was finally going to be served.
I miss her smile. I always think about how my life would be different with her. And I think it would be different. A good different.
911. Yes, I'm at South Fork Park, and we have a dead body on the road.
Do you see an obvious wound?
Yeah, it looks like her face has been smashed in. It looks definitely like somebody hurt her.
Stand back away from the body. I've got multiple officers on the way.
2 hikers at South Fork Park in the Acme Valley located a female deceased in the middle of the road. There was blood everywhere around her person. The trauma she endured during this event must have been unimaginable.
There was one set of tracks that basically led right over her. It looked like her head had been run over.
Between 11 o'clock the day before to 4 o'clock the morning of April 4th, there was 0 vehicles that came through there. Then around 6 a.m., we had 2 vehicles that came into the park. But we didn't really know what we had. Why was this victim here? Who is this person? We have a young lady's head smashed in. And we also noticed that she had 2 marks consistent with taser probes on her chest area. And the victim was missing her purse, so we couldn't identify her.
Darian was a firecracker. She came out ready for the world.
Didn't matter who you were, she'd worm her way into your heart. Loved kids, loved animals, and she loved her papa.
She was a very, very protective sister. She would always be wrapping her arms around her little brother. So I watched a very strong bond with them.
We battled like any other siblings would battle, but there was a lot of love in our relationship too. When she was in high school, she probably started going down the wrong path. My sister got sober, and I felt like I was finally building that relationship back with her.
She had been clean, and she was really trying to put her life together, and she was living with her grandparents. The night she died, her grandpa, who was still awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, Darian left and walked out to the end of the driveway, and then she was picked up. They don't know by who, and that's the last time that they saw or heard from Darian.
Not minutes later, the confidential informant informed us that she had spoken directly to a man named Brent Gerber, a drug dealer from Whatcom County. The whole reason they were going to that place was for a drug deal, to purchase methamphetamines.
We're going to have you sit over there.
We took a non-confrontational approach. He was real meek and mild and cooperative, and he wanted to talk to us.
We just want you to explain to us what actually happened, Brent.
These guys had me give them a ride to meet some people.
Okay. How do you know these guys?
They're staying in a motorhome at my buddy's house. Well, it's not my house. They live in a motorhome, too.
That's where those two are staying?
Well, not two. Just the one kid, the Peyton kid. That's why I agreed. I'm like, okay, I'd seen him there a few times. I'll give you a ride, whatever.
So what exactly did he tell you that he needed you to do when you drove him down?
To ask me to
and
meet this girl.
To meet the girl. And then what did he say he was going to do to the girl?
Jack her money.
Jack her money. Okay, got it. Okay. So and how did this other guy get involved?
They're buddies. You know, I didn't want any part of it. Besides, I was a dumbass that drove him out there. But for $50, what the hell?
Yeah. So you guys drive down there, and then where did you drive?
We went
in
to
that
the park, and then I drove in, and this girl gets out and goes over and talks to the dude. And then he's like, go. And I was like, what do you mean, go? I said, okay. And then she jumped on the truck, and they were fighting or whatever, and I just kept going.
Okay, you went, and then was she still there?
She was like reaching for inside the truck for whatever he took from her, and they were trying to push her off.
Were they pushing her?
Yeah, he was pushing on her and like hitting her in the throat, and the dude in the back had a taser, and I'm like, dude, shut the thing off, because it's traumatizing me.
Did he touch her with the taser?
I was trying to drive. I don't know if they hit her with it or not.
The theory that the medical examiner had was that she was hit by the passenger rear tire. We were convinced that Brent was responsible at that point and knew full well that he'd driven over her.
So I just kept going, and, you know, I don't know. That's about basically how it went.
Brent gave the name Peyton, and I recalled a man named Peyton Mulryan from my time when I was in a local drug task force. We definitely were going to look for Peyton Mulryan and pick him up.
Yes, Peyton. I don't know what's gonna happen. Like, what? Am I in trouble for it? Like, what did I do?
Yeah, well, you're gonna be arrested.
Me? No way.
We know there's more to the story. That's the information we want.
This morning, homicide detectives say they've arrested the driver suspected of hitting and killing a woman in Whatcom County over the weekend. They are now working on finding a second man.
Just don't move so they tighten up.
So Darian's brother, Eli, told me that he was able to log into Darian's various accounts and Facebook account in particular. And he discovered a whole series of messages from the morning when Darian died.
I sat there and read through all those messages, and then I got down to Peyton Mulryan's. I read step by step every last thing my sister did before she got killed. I read the meetup, I read everything saying that he was in a car waiting right next to her at the park. I read it all. She met Peyton Mulryan over social media that year. I think Peyton knew that she was in a vulnerable state and she trusted him. So it wasn't like she was expecting to get robbed that night.
Based off all the information, we knew she was contacting Peyton to arrange a drug deal. And their intent was to rob Darian and that she would just go away minus $250, but she fought back and they killed her. So at that point, we still weren't 100% sure who the third suspect was in the back seat with the taser, but the investigation really pivoted towards trying to find Peyton Mulryan. While searching for Peyton and his location, some leads came in about him being at this particular gas station on Saturday morning. We found video surveillance of the white pickup, that there was 3 males in it. Based off tattoos and the physical description and comparing it to previous booking photos from our jail, we were able to positively identify him. The third suspect is Tyler O'Keefe.
Tyler was arrested on a traffic stop, and he agreed to give a statement.
Okay, I don't know if Detective Francis told you, but everything in this room is recorded visually and audibly. The camera's right there. All right.
Tyler has more of a stable home life. He has a girlfriend, he has a child. So we went in there with a little more leverage. We felt that he had more to lose.
Do you know why we want to talk to you?
I have a pretty good feeling just about the whole Peyton Mulryan thing.
Peyton who?
Peyton Mulryan.
Yeah, we've got some information about how you were with Peyton. So tell us more about that.
How I was with him?
Yeah.
Well, in which...
We've got some still shots of you in the truck, the white truck with Peyton. Tell us about that.
Being with Peyton when...
Yeah.
I don't believe that I was.
Well, we believe that you were, because you're a pretty distinct-looking guy, and the photos speak for themselves. So...
In the white truck.
Yeah.
I mean,
So Tyler, we know what happened. Again, maybe if you want to start over, might be the best thing, buddy. Tyler, let's get something straight. We don't think you did anything like this purposely, okay? Not at all. It was pretty clear that Tyler just needed something to give him a little assurance that we trusted him and we didn't think he was necessarily a bad guy.
I wanted nothing to do with that. But I was in the truck with them, yes. I was not. I was in the very back seat.
Yep.
But I was not an aggressor by any means. I saw it. The gal got out of the car. She went over to Peyton's window and they were talking, and I think that's when Peyton said go, and then the driver sped off, and the gal jumped onto the truck.
Jumped on the truck where?
So, like basically on the passenger side, and then at one point was like kind of in the center of the hood, center of the vehicle, and then it was like
So she's not on the running board. She's on the hood of the car.
Yeah, I swear to God, this sounds like something out of a movie. And then the dude slammed on the brakes, and then kept going.
So she's on the hood of the car. He slams on the brakes. What happened then, Tyler?
He kept going. He never stopped.
We keep hearing about this taser that's being used.
A taser being used?
Yeah.
No. A taser, I did have a taser, but I did not use it.
Because she does have two little taser marks right here. Looks like taser.
Yeah, no. The taser was only brought out, and all I did was in the air, and it scared.
To scare her.
To scare her, yeah.
Okay.
Today's date is 4/10/2020. So why do you think you're here, Peyton?
I already know why.
All right. So do you want to talk to us about that, or ask us questions, or just tell us what happened?
I mean, I guess I would say I set up a drug deal. The drug deal went bad. Did not know anything else after that because dude kept driving. But I was a passenger.
So you set up a drug deal with Darian?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you please not say your name? I'm so up from it.
No, that's okay. Oh, we won't.
What kind of quantity?
An ounce.
Of?
Of meth?
And how much was she gonna pay you?
$250.
At any time did the exchange of dope happen?
No. There was no dope.
Grab the money and...
Yeah.
Why her? Was she an easy target just because of your guys' history, or why her? You set up the deal. She reached out to you, and you planned to rob her of her money, take her money. You knew you didn't have the dope. Why her?
Why? I don't know. I guess I was just going through it.
Through what?
Dope's dope sick. I had no money.
You were in a relationship with her at one point. To some degree. You cared about her to some degree, right?
Yeah, I still did. You know what I mean? I was just...
But you decided to rob her. Why her?
It was going to be whoever hit me up that day.
Oh, so you would have done... This would have happened with anybody that contacted you?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Prosecutor's office just felt that we would not have a successful outcome with a murder one trial, and there was a strong possibility that a jury would not have found them guilty. So ultimately, the pleas then settled on manslaughter, first degree. Peyton Mulryan received 13 years. Brent Gerber and Tyler O'Keefe both received 9 years. I don't believe the time was just on men that will be out before they're 40 years old.
Everybody blamed each other. Nobody took full responsibility for the death of Darian Sather.
I think Darian's free, and I believe that Darian's in a much better place. And she was our little sunshine, and although we may not have her here, we can carry out her name. So she was a light to this world, and it was just snuffed out a little bit sooner than we wanted.
It starts with a sound London knows too well, the distant rumble of the underground settling into silence, the metallic breath of tunnels cooling after the last train has gone. December 3, 1987, a Thursday night that should have disappeared like every other, unnoticed, unremembered. Except it didn't, because that was the night Eleanor Brooks walked out of her office and never came home. She was 32, an archivist by profession, quiet by reputation, someone whose life moved along narrow, predictable lines. Colleagues described her as punctual, methodical, almost invisible in the way she passed through rooms without disturbance. She worked late that evening at the British Library, sorting manuscripts no one had touched in decades, unaware that her own name was about to be filed away just as coldly. At 9:14 p.m., a security camera caught her leaving the building, coat buttoned to the neck, handbag tucked close, eyes forward. The footage ends without drama. No struggle. No shadow following her. Just a woman swallowed by the city frame by frame. By morning, her absence was already louder than her presence had ever been. Her landlord noticed unopened mail. Her sister called her flat and heard only the dull echo of unanswered ringing. By noon, police were inside her one-bedroom apartment in Camden, standing in a space that felt paused, unfinished. Her bed untouched. Her kettle cold. Her passport still in a drawer. No note. No packed box. No sign she had intended to go anywhere at all. The first reports were cautious. Missing adult female. No immediate evidence of foul play. Officers followed procedure, spoke to neighbors, retraced routines. Eleanor always took the same route home. Bus to the station. Underground southbound. A 10-minute walk from the platform to her door. Safe. Familiar. Ordinary. The kind of routine people trust with their lives. Within days, her face appeared on lampposts and shop windows. Black and white photocopies. The same photograph everywhere. Eleanor smiling faintly, unaware that this image would become a symbol of uncertainty. Tip lines opened.
Phones rang.
Most calls led nowhere. A woman who looked similar. A vague memory on a train. A sighting that collapsed under scrutiny. London was full of Eleanors once people started looking. Then came the theories. Voluntary disappearance. A secret life. Stress she hadn't shared. It was easier to believe she had chosen to vanish than to accept the alternative. But those closest to her rejected it outright. Eleanor planned everything. She had Christmas gifts already bought. She had train tickets to Leeds booked for the following week. She argued with her sister about curtains, not about escape. There was no fracture in her life big enough to explain disappearance. By the second week, the tone shifted. Police language hardened. Possibilities narrowed. The word abduction appeared in briefings, then leaked to the press. London tabloids moved fast. Headlines sharpened. Questions multiplied. How could someone vanish in one of the busiest cities in the world without leaving a trace? Officers combed underground stations, reviewed grainy CCTV reels frame by frame, interviewed staff who remembered nothing beyond the blur of faces passing through turnstiles. The footage betrayed them. Cameras blinked out. Angles overlapped poorly. The technology of the time offered more hope than answers. Eleanor appeared, then didn't. That gap became the center of the case, a hole large enough to swallow years. Her family waited for news that never came. Each knock at the door triggered dread. Each phone call raised and crushed hope in seconds. Days became weeks. Weeks stretched thin. Eleanor Brooks stopped being a woman and became a file number, then a problem, then something uncomfortably close to a statistic. In 1988, the investigation slowed. Detectives reassigned. Leads dried up. Resources redirected. Eleanor's case joined a growing list of unsolved disappearances, all competing for attention, all quietly losing it. The term cold case appeared in internal notes, a phrase that sounds procedural but feels like a sentence. Cold means time has passed. Cold means urgency has expired. Cold means the city has learned how to live without answers. But cold does not mean forgotten, not for everyone. Her mother marked calendars year after year, lighting a candle every December 3rd. Her sister kept Eleanor's room intact, as if preserving it might preserve her. Every unidentified body reported in the news reopened the wound. Every false lead felt like betrayal. In 1993, a man contacted police claiming he had seen Eleanor arguing with someone near a station entrance that night. He described a tall figure, dark coat, raised voice. The statement was taken seriously, then quietly dissolved under investigation.
No corroboration.
No second witness. Another door closed. In 1997, a construction crew uncovered human remains in a derelict lot in South London. For 48 hours, Eleanor's name returned to the front pages. Dental records eliminated the possibility. Relief and despair collided. The cycle repeated. Time changed everything except the question. The city modernized. CCTV improved. Forensics evolved. Eleanor remained trapped in 1987, frozen in a moment no one could see clearly. By the early 2000s, her case was taught briefly in training seminars. An example of what happens when disappearance leaves no footprint. Then it was shelved again. Until 2019. The revival didn't come with drama or intention. Came with routine. A junior analyst tasked with digitizing old cold cases noticed something small, almost insulting in its simplicity. A witness statement logged in the early hours of December 4, 1987, marked non-relevant, never cross-referenced, never re-examined. It described a man standing in a service alley 2 blocks from the station, beside a white panel van, wiping his hands repeatedly with a cloth. No blood confirmed. No crime scene linked. The officer at the time dismissed it. London at night was full of strange sights. But decades later, that dismissal felt heavier. The analyst flagged the report. A detective reopened the file. For the first time in 32 years, Eleanor Brooks' case was active again. Records were traced. Vehicle registrations recovered from archives thought long obsolete. The van led to a name. A man who had lived quietly since the late 80s. No criminal record worth mentioning. Married. Employed. Unremarkable. The kind of man no one associates with headlines. When police approached him, there were no flashing lights. No handcuffs. Just questions. He agreed to speak. He always did. He said he remembered the night. He said he had been near the station. He said nothing unusual had happened. His story was smooth, practiced, aged by repetition. Interviews continued. Details shifted slightly. Times moved. Routes changed. Small inconsistencies emerged, subtle enough to be explained away, significant enough to accumulate. Investigators noticed pauses where confidence should have lived, corrections that arrived too quickly, memory working too hard. Pressure mounted quietly. No public announcements. No leaks. Just patient repetition. The past has a way of weakening defenses built on silence. In the fifth interview, something broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. His voice lowered. His hands stopped moving. He stopped asking questions. He said her name. The confession came in fragments stripped of theatrics. A chance encounter. A conversation that escalated. Anger flaring too fast to control. A body concealed in a place so ordinary it escaped notice for decades. The words landed heavily, filling a silence that had waited 32 years. When the news finally broke, it detonated across London. London 1987 cold case solved.
Surprise confession choc public.
The headlines were loud, but the truth beneath them was quiet and devastating. Eleanor Brooks had not vanished. She had been taken. And the city had lived beside her secret for more than 3 decades. For her family, answers arrived wrapped in grief. For the public, relief mixed with unease. And for London, the case left behind a lingering chill. A reminder etched into tunnels and streets alike. Cold cases do not disappear. They wait. And sometimes when the wait becomes unbearable, they speak. The confession did not end the story. It reopened it, pulling the past forward into the present with a violence of its own, forcing everyone to look again at a night they thought they had already survived. When detectives left the interview room, the city outside was unchanged, buses running, lights blinking, commuters moving with practiced indifference, but inside the file everything shifted, timelines rearranged themselves, assumptions collapsed. And the quiet certainty of 3 decades dissolved into something raw and immediate. The man who confessed had lived among them for years, shared pavements, queued for coffee, nodded at neighbors, his face familiar enough to disappear into crowds. His admission turned that familiarity into a threat, the idea that something so monstrous could hide inside something so ordinary. Investigators returned to December 1987 with renewed urgency, not as historians, but as witnesses finally allowed to speak. They walked the route Eleanor took that night, counting steps, measuring distances, listening to the echo of their own footsteps where hers had once faded. The service alley, overlooked and narrow, sat between a row of shuttered shops and a brick wall stained by rain and time. In daylight it looked harmless, forgettable, the kind of place no one notices unless they need to. That ordinariness had protected the truth for decades. Forensic teams arrived with modern tools and modern patience. Soil samples were taken, concrete scanned, records reviewed. The confession provided direction, but it did not replace evidence. It never could. Every word had to be tested against reality, against what the city would still allow them to recover. The search uncovered fragments. Not enough for spectacle. Enough for confirmation. Fibers trapped beneath layers of dirt. A personal item degraded by years but still recognizable. The city had tried to erase her, but it had failed completely. Eleanor Brooks left something behind after all. As evidence mounted, the confession deepened. Interviews resumed, this time without pretense. The man spoke more freely, no longer correcting himself, no longer resisting the weight of what he had carried. He described the encounter as accidental, a conversation sparked by proximity and impatience, words exchanged too sharply, pride flaring in the cold. He insisted it was never planned. He insisted he lost control. Investigators listened without interruption, recording every pause, every justification, every attempt to soften the truth. Outside the interview room, the world reacted. News outlets replayed Eleanor's photograph, now aged by technology and repetition. Commentators debated how such a crime could go unsolved for so long. Cold case experts dissected procedural failures, missed opportunities, blind spots built into another era. The public wanted explanations as much as closure. For Eleanor's family, the renewed attention was unbearable and necessary at the same time. Her sister sat through briefings with clenched hands, absorbing details she had imagined 1,000 times but never wanted confirmed. Her mother, older now, listened quietly, as if grief had already taught her everything words could not. They had waited 32 years for answers. Answers, it turned out, were not gentle. As prosecutors prepared charges, they reconstructed the timeline minute by minute. Eleanor leaving the library, her route home, the moment paths crossed, the alley, the van, the concealment. Each detail was placed under a light bright enough to burn away doubt. The defense would come later. For now, truth had to be assembled piece by piece. The case exposed more than one crime. It revealed the limits of memory, the fragility of early investigations, the consequences of dismissing something because it does not fit an immediate narrative. That overlooked witness statement, once marked irrelevant, now read like a quiet scream buried in paperwork. Officers involved in the original investigation reviewed it again, many of them retired, some no longer alive to see the correction. The past could not be changed, only acknowledged. Public reaction hardened as details emerged. Sympathy for explanations of losing control evaporated quickly. This was not a momentary lapse. It was a lifetime of silence. The city struggled with that distinction, with the idea that justice delayed could still be justice, but never justice undamaged. Court proceedings began under intense scrutiny. Cameras lined the steps. Reporters crowded the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was stripped of drama, governed by procedure and restraint. The man who once blended into crowds now sat alone, reduced to a name on a docket, his ordinariness transformed into evidence of deception. Prosecutors spoke carefully. They emphasized continuity, not shock. They framed the confession as the final piece in a long, patient pursuit. Not a miracle, not an accident. Evidence was presented slowly, deliberately, allowing the weight of years to press against every sentence. The defense argued memory distortion, coercion, the unreliability of confessions made decades later. They questioned evidence degraded by time, suggested gaps could never be filled. It was a familiar strategy, one that thrives on uncertainty. But uncertainty had already lost its grip. The case no longer relied on what might have happened. It rested on what finally came to light. As testimony unfolded, the public learned details once withheld, moments once considered too small to matter. The way Eleanor held her bag, the exact time the last train passed, the sound of the alley at night. These fragments, meaningless alone, formed a narrative too complete to ignore. For London, the trial became a mirror. It reflected fear, resilience, guilt, and relief in equal measure. People revisited their own routines, their own assumptions of safety, their own trust and familiarity. The idea that danger could emerge from such an unremarkable interaction unsettled the city more than any sensational villain ever could. When the verdict arrived, it did not explode. It settled. Guilty. The word carried finality but not satisfaction. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, only acknowledgement. Eleanor Brooks had been taken, and the truth had finally been named. Sentencing followed. The years weighed heavily, both counted and discounted. The judge spoke of harm that extended beyond the victim, beyond the family, into the fabric of the community itself. A life stolen and then hidden. Silence treated as strategy. Time abused as shield. Outside the courthouse, cameras captured faces strained by emotion. Some cried. Some stared. Some turned away. The city absorbed the outcome quietly, as if loud reactions would cheapen what had been endured. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor's name began to settle into history with a different shape. Not as a mystery, not as a question, as a story with an ending, however incomplete it felt. Memorials appeared briefly, then faded. Life resumed because it always does. But something lingered beneath the routine. A recognition that cold cases are not dormant. They are unfinished conversations, waiting for someone to listen closely enough. Eleanor Brooks' case reminded London that time does not bury truth. It only delays the moment it demands to be heard. And long after headlines moved on, after cameras packed away and courtrooms emptied, the city carried that reminder forward. a quiet awareness threading through stations and streets alike. The past is closer than it looks. And sometimes, after decades of silence, it speaks with a clarity that cannot be ignored. The city seemed unchanged, yet everything had shifted under the surface. London kept moving, the buses, the taxis, the pedestrians flowing through the underground tunnels, but in those same streets, on those same steps, there lingered a tension born from decades of unanswered questions now finally answered. Eleanor Brooks was no longer missing, yet the absence she had left continued to echo through every corner of her life, through every person who had known her, through every investigator who had waited years to hear a confession. Investigators returned repeatedly to the scene, retracing the final hours of Eleanor's life with precision and care. They measured the distances from the library to the bus stop, from the bus stop to the underground, from the platform to the alley. Every detail mattered. Every second could reveal something previously overlooked. The service alley, narrow and dimly lit in 1987, had remained mostly unchanged. A peeling wall, a discarded bottle, the faint scuff of shoes along concrete. For decades it had hidden a truth the city refused to see, and now that truth had been exposed. Forensic teams moved through the alley as if walking on hallowed ground. They sifted through soil, examined brickwork, collected fibers and fragments that might still carry traces of the past. Every fiber told a story. Every fragment whispered of moments no camera had ever captured. Technology had advanced enough to extract meaning from what was once meaningless, to bring life to evidence long considered cold, insignificant, dead. The man's confession guided them, yet it could not replace the physical evidence. His words opened doors that had remained locked for decades, but it was the tangible, the concrete, the things left behind, however degraded, that finally made the story complete. A scarf once folded and hidden, discolored by time. A shoe print partially washed away but preserved in shadow. The things she carried, the things she wore, became the silent witnesses of that night. Her family was present during these recoveries. Her sister, gripping her mother's hand, watched as items once thought lost emerged from the shadows. Grief and relief intermingled, raw and unfiltered. 32 years of silence, fear, and speculation could not be undone in an instant. But for the first time, mourning took on a defined shape, a boundary. The unknown became known, horrific yet concrete, and there was a strange solace in finally facing the truth. The confession itself revealed more than the crime. It revealed the ways ordinary people can hide extraordinary darkness, the ability of small actions to spiral into tragedy. The man described the escalation of words, the heat of anger, the misjudged moments that led to irreversible consequences. It was not planned. It was not premeditated, but it was deliberate in its denial, in its concealment, in its decades-long silence. That silence had allowed the city to breathe easy while the truth festered beneath its streets. Media coverage intensified. Every detail became a headline. Cold case experts dissected procedural errors. Commentators debated whether the initial investigation had been thorough or negligent. The public struggled with the knowledge that a person could live among them, seemingly ordinary, while carrying the weight of a crime no one could have imagined. Eleanor's image, once lost to fading posters, was reborn in digital pixels. The city reminded daily of the human cost of time. Inside the courtroom, proceedings unfolded with calculated precision. Prosecutors painted a chronological account, guiding the jury through every step, every decision, every moment the man had tried to bury in silence. They reconstructed the encounter, the argument, the moments that escalated beyond control, and the concealment of the body. They presented the recovered items, each one a tangible link between confession and fact, and each one struck the room with silent gravity. The defense argued memory distortion, the unreliability of confessions made decades later, the possibility of coercion, and the deterioration of evidence. But the confession, backed by recovered material evidence, created a narrative so strong that doubt faltered. The past, finally examined under the unflinching light of modern investigation, refused to bend. The man's demeanor shifted as the trial progressed. Once calm, measured, and controlled, he became smaller, quieter, haunted by the inevitability of exposure. Every recounting of that night chipped away at his defenses. For 32 years, he had relied on the city's forgetfulness, on the inefficiency of paper and time. Now the mechanisms of justice had caught up with him, relentless and patient. The public remained riveted. Londoners revisited their own memories of that time, their own assumptions of safety, their habitual trust in routines and familiar faces. The idea that danger could exist in ordinary interactions unsettled the city more profoundly than sensationalized violence ever could. People paused on underground platforms, looking at strangers with a hint of suspicion, remembering Eleanor's story, and the fragility of ordinary life. When the verdict finally arrived, it was concise and final. Guilty. There was no cheering, no triumphalism, no sense of victory. The city acknowledged it quietly, understanding that the real victory had been the revelation of truth, the acknowledgement of decades-long pain, and the reclamation of Eleanor's story from silence. Her family, now armed with facts rather than speculation, faced their grief with a newfound clarity. Closure did not erase pain, but it framed it, contained it, and allowed mourning to begin in a structured, if painful, manner. Sentencing was solemn, a measured acknowledgement of loss and accountability. The judge emphasized the harm inflicted, not only on the victim and her family, but on the broader community. A life taken and hidden, a society forced to ignore its own shadows, and decades of silence treated as protective. Time had been weaponized by inaction, but justice, however delayed, finally arrived. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered silently, some to bear witness, some to reconcile with the implications of the case. Faces reflected the city's collective reckoning, grief, relief, and lingering unease. Cameras captured the reactions of a public force to confront the truth that ordinary people can harbor extraordinary darkness, that quiet facades can mask terrible secrets. In the days following the trial, the city adapted. London continued to bustle, but Eleanor Brooks' name became a quiet, persistent echo in conversation, a reminder of vulnerability, of imperfection in protective systems, and of the patient persistence required to unearth truth. Cold cases no longer seemed dormant. They were understood as unfinished conversations, waiting for attention and persistence to demand acknowledgement. For her family, the lingering aftermath carried its own weight. Anniversaries once marked by uncertainty were now punctuated with remembrance and recognition. The unknown had been replaced by defined reality, horrifying in detail yet grounding in its definitiveness. They could mourn, could grieve, could remember, instead of endlessly imagining possibilities. Police departments, facing criticism and acclaim simultaneously, revised protocols. Witness statements would never again be dismissed without careful consideration. Minor anomalies once overlooked would be flagged, revisited, reevaluated. Eleanor's case became a blueprint for modern investigation, demonstrating the necessity of patience, persistence, and the unyielding pursuit of truth, no matter how long it takes. The confession, the recovery, and the trial created a ripple effect. Public awareness of cold cases increased. Communities became more vigilant. Families of missing persons felt a renewed sense of hope. Time, once the enemy of justice, became a tool, demonstrating that patience and determination can expose even the deepest concealment. Yet, for all the progress, London could not forget entirely. Every station, every alley, every darkened street carried a memory of that night, of a life interrupted and hidden. The city's pulse remained aware, subtle but present, reminding everyone that normality is fragile, safety is conditional, and ordinary spaces can hide extraordinary tragedy. Eleanor Brooks' story, now complete yet scarred by the years of silence, became both warning and memorial. It reminded the city that the past does not vanish, that the echoes of injustice remain, and that attention, persistence, and courage are required to transform cold cases from forgotten files into narratives of truth and accountability. Even as London moved forward, the city itself seemed quieter at night. Footsteps in the underground echoed differently, shadows held a heavier weight, and commuters glanced at strangers with an unspoken awareness. Life resumed, but the memory of what had been lost, and what had finally been revealed, lingered in the architecture, in the air, and in the collective consciousness. The past had spoken, the city had listened, but in every corridor, every alley, every station, there remained the knowledge that cold cases do not sleep. They wait, patient, unyielding, persistent, and when the time is right, they demand to be heard. The night of December 3, 1987, returned again and again in the minds of those who had waited. It was not just a date. It had become a presence, haunting the underground, the alleyways, the streets of Camden, where footsteps and shadows replayed themselves like a film no one could stop. Every detail, once dismissed, now demanded attention. Each echo of Eleanor Brooks' disappearance, once buried in files and fading photographs, rose to the surface with a weight that pressed on investigators, the public, and her family alike. Investigators retraced the moments leading up to her disappearance with meticulous care. The library where she worked had not changed much, yet its quiet halls now seemed haunted, corridors echoing with footsteps that no longer belonged. Her colleagues, some still alive, recounted those final hours with precision, describing the way she organized manuscripts, the soft click of her heels on the floor, the sound of her coat brushing against shelves. These small, ordinary details now carried extraordinary significance, a temporal bridge connecting the present with the night that had refused to fade. The service alley 2 blocks from the station remained largely unchanged, overgrown in some areas, littered with the remnants of a city that did not pause for grief. Forensic teams descended once more, their modern tools illuminating fragments long hidden. Dust lifted. Concrete was scanned for impressions. Fibers, once invisible, glimmered under ultraviolet light. Each discovery reinforced the confession and cemented the narrative that had taken decades to emerge. Eleanor's scarf, partially decomposed but still recognizable, became a symbol of persistence, a testament to survival in memory, even if not in life. Her bag, tattered and worn, held the faintest traces of fibers and hair. Each recovered object carried a story, a fragment of a life violently interrupted, now returned to the light. For her family, these items were both bomb and blade. They confirmed her fate, yet they made the absence tangible in a way that words never could. Inside the courtroom, the trial continued with the gravity of decades pressing down on every word. Prosecutors guided the jury through each step. Eleanor leaving work, the final bus, the underground platform, the alley, the van, the concealment. They presented evidence with methodical precision, allowing the fragments of a shattered life to speak for themselves. Each fiber, each footprint, each small trace served as a witness, corroborating the confession and bridging the gap of 32 years. The man who had confessed now sat stripped of normalcy. His composure, once carefully maintained, faltered under the weight of time and scrutiny. Every recollection chipped away at his defenses. Every acknowledgement of detail, every hesitation, revealed the cracks in a carefully constructed facade. The ordinariness that had allowed him to walk unnoticed through decades of life was now a glaring indicator of guilt. Media coverage intensified. News outlets replayed Eleanor's photograph and retold her story with the urgency of justice finally served. Commentators debated procedural failures, public officials faced questions about the handling of cold cases, and the public confronted the unsettling reality that someone who appeared ordinary could carry extraordinary darkness. Eleanor Brooks' disappearance, once a shadow in the city's memory, now became a stark lesson in the persistence of truth. The public's reaction was a mixture of shock, relief, and unease. Londoners revisited their routines, their assumptions of safety, and the trust they placed in familiar spaces. The city, bustling and indifferent, had concealed a violent truth within its ordinary rhythm. Eleanor's story reminded everyone that danger does not announce itself, and that the quietest nights may carry the loudest consequences. Her family endured each revelation with a combination of resilience and raw emotion. Her sister, once numb from years of uncertainty, now absorbed details she had imagined countless times but never truly wanted confirmed. Her mother, aged by decades of anxiety and unanswered questions, listened with quiet endurance, every revelation both horrifying and strangely comforting. The narrative, finally defined, allowed them to mourn in a structured way. They could grieve a life interrupted rather than a life imagined. Police departments reflecting on the case revised protocols. Witness statements, once dismissed as irrelevant, were now preserved, flagged, and reevaluated. Minor anomalies received attention, not dismissal. Eleanor Brooks' case became a blueprint for modern investigation, illustrating the necessity of patience, persistence, and meticulous care in uncovering truth. Cold cases were no longer simply files on a shelf. They were living, waiting conversations demanding recognition. Inside the courtroom, testimony exposed not only the crime but also the psychological burden carried by the man who had confessed. He described the escalation of a brief argument into irreversible violence. Words exchanged, misjudged, intensified by anger and impatience, led to a moment he could not control. Every minute detail mattered, not to justify the act, but to explain the path from ordinary encounter to tragedy. The jury listened silent, as fragments of a lifelong concealment were presented with unflinching precision. Outside, the city watched and learned. The trial forced a reconsideration of ordinary spaces, the alleys, the streets, the stations that were taken for granted. Every commuter became, in imagination if not reality, a potential witness. Londoners carried the story in small, private ways, through cautious glances, through heightened awareness, through conversations whispered in cafes and offices. The city itself absorbed the lesson. The past is never truly gone, and silence, when abused, has consequences. When the verdict was delivered, the atmosphere was subdued. Guilty. The word echoed quietly but heavily, across families, investigators, and the city. There was no celebration, no triumphalism. The acknowledgement of truth was victory enough. The man, stripped of ordinariness, faced decades of accountability for a life destroyed. Justice, delayed though it had been, finally arrived. Sentencing reinforced the gravity of the crime. The judge addressed the long-reaching impact, not only on Eleanor and her family but on the community. A life stolen and concealed, silence maintained as a weapon, and decades-long concealment now accounted for. Time had been a shield for evil, yet ultimately truth had pierced it. In the days that followed, Eleanor Brooks' name became a quiet, persistent presence. She was remembered not as a missing person, but as a woman whose story had survived decades of silence. Communities became aware of the fragility of ordinary life. Cold cases were recognized as unfinished narratives demanding attention and perseverance. Families of missing persons found renewed hope. The persistence of truth became a lesson in patience and vigilance. Yet, London could not entirely forget. Shadows in the underground carried memories of that night. Alleys whispered the echoes of footsteps. Streets reminded passers-by that safety is provisional, that ordinary spaces can conceal extraordinary tragedies. The city's pulse, once oblivious, now carried the weight of collective memory, a constant awareness threading through everyday life. Eleanor's story became both warning and memorial, demonstrating the persistence of truth over the silence of decades. The confession, the recovery, and the trial had transformed a cold case into a narrative of resolution, accountability, and reflection. Time had been long, patience tested, but ultimately justice prevailed. And so life in London continued. Buses ran, trains rumbled, crowds flowed. Yet beneath the routine, beneath the ordinary hum of the city, there remained a quiet acknowledgement. Cold cases do not sleep. They wait. They linger. They demand to be heard. And when they speak, even decades later, the city listens. Even after the verdict, London felt different. The city moved, buses and trains operating as they always had, streets crowded with commuters, but beneath the ordinary rhythm, an unease lingered. Eleanor Brooks' story had left its mark, a reminder that the past can hide in plain sight, that ordinary places, an alley, a station, a street corner, can conceal extraordinary darkness. People glanced over shoulders, noted strangers more carefully, remembered that a life could vanish in an instant, leaving behind questions that could take decades to answer. The man who had confessed sat in his cell, stripped of the anonymity he had relied on for 32 years. His reflection, once unnoticed, now stared back at him daily in harsh fluorescent light. Isolation did not erase memory. Every word spoken in interviews, every detail revealed in court, haunted him. Guilt, long contained beneath layers of routine and indifference, became an ever-present weight. Time had allowed him to believe he could hide, but the past had a patience he had underestimated. Eleanor's family began to rebuild their understanding of her life. Her sister returned to the apartment in Camden, now quiet but heavy with memories. Every object, every corner, held traces of her presence. The scarf, the bag, the papers, all fragments recovered decades later, remained symbols of her life interrupted. They sorted belongings with care, speaking softly as they handled items that were at once ordinary and profound, tangible reminders of a life stolen and finally acknowledged. In schools, in police departments, in newsrooms, Eleanor Brooks became a case study, not for sensationalism, but for the lessons embedded in time, patience, and perseverance. Cold cases were no longer simply shelved files. They were living narratives that demanded attention, demanding careful review and a commitment to truth. Officers who had once worked on her disappearance revisited protocols, emphasizing the importance of minor anomalies, of witness statements dismissed too quickly, of details that seemed irrelevant but might one day matter. For the city, the story spread in quiet ways. Londoners shared the narrative in hushed conversations, reflecting on their own routines and vulnerabilities. Parents walked their children home with sharper eyes, strangers on the train felt less invisible, and ordinary places, alleys, underpasses, empty streets, were approached with renewed caution. Eleanor's disappearance, solved after decades, had transformed perception, shaping a city's awareness of its own fragility. Media coverage persisted, highlighting the perseverance of investigators, the confession, the recovered evidence, and the implications for law enforcement. Experts weighed in on forensic advancements that had made the resolution possible, discussing how fibers, degraded materials, and overlooked statements could now illuminate long-buried truths. The public consumed these narratives eagerly, simultaneously shocked by the crime and reassured by the triumph of diligence and persistence. Investigators continued to cross-check every detail from the confession. They reconstructed Eleanor's final night step by step, using old maps, records, and modern surveillance analysis. Every shadow in the alley, every scuff on the pavement, every corner previously ignored, became significant. Modern tools revealed what 1987 technology had missed: microscopic fibers, latent impressions, subtle traces of clothing and hair. The city had unknowingly preserved its own secrets, waiting for the right eyes to see them. Eleanor's story also forced reflection on human behavior. The man's actions, ordinary on the surface, had concealed extraordinary danger. His confession highlighted how small moments, sharp words, fleeting anger, impatience, can spiral into irreversible tragedy. It underscored the fragility of trust and the ease with which normal life can mask evil. The lesson was unsettling. The people we pass daily, the neighbors, colleagues, and strangers, might carry unknown burdens capable of devastating consequences. For her family, the resolution was bittersweet. Relief at finally knowing the truth mingled with grief for the years lost, the milestones Eleanor would never reach, the moments never shared. They visited memorials quietly, private ceremonies to mark remembrance and closure. Every recovered item, every word of confession, became a bridge between absence and presence, grief and understanding. The past had been brought forward, not erased but contextualized, allowing mourning to have form and definition. Law enforcement agencies took note. Policies were revised. Cold cases were prioritized differently. Overlooked statements were re-examined. Minor anomalies treated as potential breakthroughs. Eleanor Brooks' case became a touchstone, demonstrating that no matter how long a case has gone unsolved, time alone does not erase responsibility. Patience, diligence, and attention to detail remained as vital as ever. Within the courtroom, jurors reflected on the complexity of decades-long investigation and delayed confession. They were not merely judging the man before them, but considering the city, the systems, and the society that allowed silence to persist for so long. The verdict, guilty, felt both definitive and incomplete. Justice had been served, but only after time, only after suffering, and only after persistence revealed the truth the city had once ignored. In the weeks following the trial, Eleanor Brooks' name returned to public memory with a different weight. She was no longer a missing person. She was a symbol of resilience, the persistence of truth, and the importance of accountability. Her story became a reminder of the city's own responsibility to its residents, and the need for vigilance in ordinary places where extraordinary tragedy can hide. London moved forward but differently. The city's rhythm persisted, yet beneath it, awareness lingered. The underground, the alleys, the streets, the shadows, all carried the memory of Eleanor's disappearance. Commuters glanced at strangers, more conscious of their surroundings. Children walked with parents more attentive. Neighbors noticed patterns more carefully. The city's collective consciousness had been permanently altered by the events of December 3, 1987, and their long-awaited resolution. And still, despite closure, the story retained its lessons. Cold cases do not rest. They are patient, waiting for attention, for persistence, for diligence. They remind us that silence can be deceptive, that time can obscure truth but not erase it. And when finally revealed, they demand acknowledgement, reflection, and change. For Eleanor Brooks, the recovery of her story allowed a family to grieve definitively, allowed investigators to feel the satisfaction of relentless pursuit, and allowed the city to recognize its own vulnerabilities. But for London itself, the echo remained. Ordinary streets, ordinary people, ordinary nights could conceal unimaginable darkness. Awareness, vigilance, and diligence were not just lessons, they were necessities. Even in the ordinary flow of life, in the rhythm of buses, trains, and footsteps, there remained a quiet, persistent presence. Eleanor Brooks. Her story, once buried under decades of silence, now resounded in memory, in policy, in awareness, in collective consciousness. And the city, aware and altered, continued to listen. The trial's conclusion did not mark the end of the story. It marked a turning point, a pivot from speculation to reality, from uncertainty to painstaking clarity. London, always moving, now moved differently, with an awareness that ordinary streets, ordinary faces, and ordinary routines could conceal extraordinary darkness. Commuters on the Underground glanced at one another with a flicker of unease, as if shadows themselves carried memory. Families walked their children home with sharper eyes, neighbors watched doorways more closely, and the city's pulse seemed to thrum with an underlying caution that had not existed before. Inside the courthouse, the man who had confessed remained subdued. His demeanor, once ordinary and unremarkable, was now dominated by a quiet, relentless gravity. For 32 years, he had relied on the ordinary world's indifference, on its busy rhythms, on the assumption that no one would connect past and present. But now, under the scrutiny of law, society, and relentless memory, he had nowhere to hide. Every statement he had made, every pause, every shift of tone became evidence, a layer of accountability that accumulated and pressed down with inexorable weight. Investigators returned repeatedly to the site of Eleanor Brooks' disappearance. The alley, once just a narrow passage between brick buildings, now held the weight of memory, shadowed with meaning. Modern forensics allowed them to uncover fragments that had eluded detection for decades. Microscopic fibers adhering stubbornly to brickwork, soil samples harboring traces of clothing, subtle impressions in the ground. Each discovery, however small, reinforced the narrative that had emerged from the man's confession, transforming words into tangible proof. Her family accompanied the teams during some recoveries. Her sister, steady but tense, handled items that were both ordinary and extraordinary. A scarf, a tattered bag, personal effects that survived decades in concealment. Each artifact confirmed the truth of the confession and anchored it in reality, making Eleanor's story visible in a way that words alone could never achieve. Grief and closure intertwined, a painful but necessary coexistence. For the first time, the unknown had shape. The silence that had dominated 32 years had finally been broken. The confession itself revealed patterns of human behavior that were both banal and terrifying. A brief argument, trivial in isolation, had escalated into irreversible violence. Words exchanged too sharply, frustration unchecked, patience absent. These small, ordinary moments became catastrophic. It was a reminder that ordinary people, ordinary nights, ordinary routines could mask extraordinary acts. The crime's ordinariness magnified its horror, making the city question the safety of routine, the reliability of familiarity, and the hidden capacity for harm in those we trust. Media coverage followed every procedural development, emphasizing the relentless work of investigators, the technological advances that revealed decades-old evidence, and the confession that had finally illuminated the cold case. Public awareness grew, blending shock with recognition of the importance of diligence. Experts analyzed the procedural missteps of the past, the overlooked witness statements, and the missed connections, turning the case into a blueprint for modern investigative practice. Cold cases, once dormant files gathering dust, became living narratives demanding attention, persistence, and patience. Within the courtroom, The prosecution meticulously reconstructed the sequence of events. Each step Eleanor had taken, from the library to the bus, from the underground to the alley, was recreated with methodical precision. Every object recovered, every fiber, every trace, became part of a narrative too coherent to ignore. The jury listened with intensity, absorbing the details of decades-long concealment, the gradual buildup of evidence, and the final confession that revealed what had been hidden. Outside, the city responded quietly. Londoners processed the knowledge that someone who appeared ordinary could carry extraordinary danger. The man's decades of ordinary life had concealed the extraordinary crime he committed. That revelation unsettled the public more profoundly than sensationalized reporting ever could. People revisited their routines, their interactions, and their assumptions about safety, realizing that ordinary days can hide extraordinary events. For Eleanor's family, the resolution allowed a fragile reconstruction of life around the truth. Anniversaries, once defined by uncertainty and anxiety, could now be marked with recognition and reflection. Grief remained, but it had a context, a framework shaped by facts rather than speculation. The artifacts, the recovered evidence, the confession, and the court proceedings formed a narrative bridge, connecting absence to reality and allowing mourning to exist with definition. Law enforcement agencies took lessons from the case, updating protocols, preserving minor anomalies, and reviewing witness statements with a heightened sense of scrutiny. Eleanor Brooks' case became a guiding example of the importance of diligence, of perseverance over decades, and of the consequences of dismissal. Cold cases were no longer dormant. They were dynamic, demanding attention, and capable of being solved even after decades of neglect. The man's psychological state revealed the long-term burden of concealment. The act itself, momentary and uncontrolled, had been compounded by 32 years of secrecy. Guilt, long deferred, emerged in interviews and courtroom testimony as a quiet but inescapable presence. Memory, flawed and reconstructed, could no longer shield him. Time had failed to erase responsibility. As the trial concluded, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. There was no celebration, no theatrical relief, only acknowledgement. Justice, delayed but deliberate, had been served. Eleanor's family felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. The truth was now visible, but it came with the full weight of the years lost. For London, the case became both a cautionary tale and a story of perseverance, a reminder of the resilience of truth and the necessity of vigilance. In the weeks that followed, the public continued to process the implications. Commuters remained aware of their surroundings. Children were accompanied home with greater attentiveness. Ordinary spaces, the alleys, the streets, the stations were seen anew, infused with a sense of fragility and caution. Eleanor Brooks' story had transformed perception, embedding an awareness that safety is never guaranteed, and that ordinary life can conceal extraordinary darkness. The recovery of physical evidence further solidified the narrative. Each fiber, each fragment, each item preserved for decades was now a testament to persistence and truth. Investigators meticulously cataloged every discovery, ensuring that Eleanor's story was preserved accurately and respectfully. These artifacts were more than proof. They were markers of a life disrupted, of the passage of time, and of the persistence required to finally uncover the truth. Even as London returned to its routine, the city carried a persistent awareness. Eleanor's disappearance, the confession, and the trial became part of the urban consciousness. Shadows, steps, and corners were remembered differently. Commuters carried the lessons quietly, the memory of a woman taken and hidden, and the knowledge that ordinary nights can conceal extraordinary events. Eleanor Brooks' story, once a fragment of uncertainty, had now become a defined narrative, a cautionary tale, and a symbol of diligence, perseverance, and justice. The city, forever altered, had learned that cold cases are patient, waiting, and insistent. They demand recognition, persistence, and courage. And when finally addressed, even decades later, they reshape understanding, memory, and society itself. Even after the trial, the reverberations of Eleanor Brooks' story continued to ripple through London. The city, accustomed to its routines, had shifted subtly. The rhythm of everyday life, buses arriving, trains departing, pedestrians weaving through crowded streets, remained the same, but beneath that familiar surface, an awareness lingered. Every alley, every shadowed corner, Every station platform was now imbued with memory, a silent acknowledgement of the night that had vanished into decades of uncertainty and the life that had been stolen. For Eleanor's family, the aftermath was an ongoing negotiation with grief and relief. Her sister returned repeatedly to the apartment in Camden, once abandoned, now a place of reflection. The room where Eleanor had lived remained quiet, every object carefully preserved or examined. The recovered items, the tattered bag, the scarf, personal papers, were now tangible links to a life interrupted, fragments that transformed absence into presence. Grief was no longer suspended in speculation. It had a framework, a story, a truth. Yet within that clarity remained the pain of lost decades, moments never shared, milestones never celebrated, the ordinary joys of life stolen. Investigators, meanwhile, reflected on the implications of decades-long concealment. Cold cases were no longer seen as files that could be closed, forgotten, or archived. Eleanor Brooks' story demonstrated the enduring power of overlooked evidence, minor anomalies, and statements once dismissed as irrelevant. Agencies updated protocols, flagging minor inconsistencies, reviewing witness statements with new diligence, and implementing technology capable of revealing hidden truths. What had once been routine oversight became a reminder that persistence, attention to detail, and methodical review could resurrect even the coldest of cases. The confession itself provided insight into human behavior, ordinary interactions escalating into tragedy. A brief argument, a misjudged word, a flaring of anger. These moments, mundane on the surface, had grown into irreversible consequences. The man who confessed had relied for decades on the ordinariness of his life, on the city's indifference, on the assumption that time would protect him. But the persistence of memory, the diligence of investigators, and the patience of truth had finally caught him. His ordinary existence had become evidence of deception, a chilling reminder that darkness can hide within the mundane. Media coverage chronicled the trial and its aftermath extensively. Headlines emphasized the persistence of investigators, the recovered evidence, and the confession that illuminated the decades-old mystery. Experts discussed procedural missteps of the past, the overlooked witness statements, and the ways modern forensics could resolve cold cases previously considered unsolvable. The public consumed these narratives with fascination and unease, captivated by both the horror of the crime and the persistence of truth that finally restored clarity. Inside the courtroom, the meticulous reconstruction of Eleanor's final hours continued to dominate proceedings. Every step she had taken, from the library to the bus, from the underground platform to the alley, was examined in minute detail. Each recovered object, every fiber, every trace, became a piece of a narrative too complete to ignore. Jurors listened intently, absorbing the decades of concealment, the confession, and the evidence that transformed long-standing uncertainty into undeniable truth. The city responded quietly but observantly. Commuters became subtly more aware of their surroundings. Families walked children home with heightened vigilance. Ordinary urban spaces, the alleys, the underpasses, the streets, were now seen through a lens of fragility and caution. Eleanor Brooks' case had altered perception, teaching the city that safety is provisional, that ordinary life can conceal extraordinary events, and that diligence and attention are not optional but necessary. Her family, navigating the emotional aftermath, slowly integrated the new reality. Anniversaries previously marked by uncertainty now carried acknowledgement, memory, and reflection. Grief remained, but it had structure and definition. Every artifact, every recovered item, every confession testimony formed a bridge between absence and presence, between the void of unknown years and the reality of truth. The past, finally revealed, allowed mourning to exist with clarity and purpose. Police departments, reflecting on the case, revised their procedures. Witness statements once dismissed as irrelevant were now treated with care. Minor anomalies were investigated thoroughly, and evidence, no matter how small, was preserved. Eleanor Brooks' case became a touchstone for the importance of persistence, diligence, and patient investigation. Cold cases were no longer inert files. They were dynamic narratives demanding attention and resolution, capable of restoring truth even decades after the fact. The psychological impact on the man who confessed became apparent. His ordinary life, long relied upon to conceal guilt, now offered no refuge. Memory, flawed and reconstructed over decades, could not shield him from accountability. Guilt, long deferred, pressed upon him relentlessly. The trial, confession, and recovery of evidence forced a confrontation with consequences that no ordinary life could escape. When the verdict was delivered, guilty, the city responded with subdued acknowledgement rather than celebration. Justice, delayed but deliberate, had been served. Eleanor Brooks' family felt relief and sorrow in equal measure. The truth, finally revealed, confirmed what had been feared for decades, yet the pain of years lost remained. For London, the case became both a cautionary tale and a testament to perseverance, vigilance, and the enduring power of truth. In the weeks following the trial, the public continued to internalize the story. Commuters moved through stations with renewed awareness, families adjusted routines with greater care, and the city retained a subtle but persistent recognition that ordinary spaces could hide extraordinary danger. Eleanor Brooks' story became a quiet presence in the city, shaping perception and behavior, embedding lessons in vigilance, awareness, and the importance of attention to detail. Physical evidence recovered decades later reinforced the narrative. Fibers, fragments, and personal items became tangible witnesses, each confirming the confession and bridging the gap between silence and truth. These artifacts did more than prove guilt. They humanized Eleanor, her life and absence, giving her presence back to her family and restoring a story once silenced. Even as London returned to routine, the city carried a persistent awareness. Shadows, steps, and corners remained reminders of her disappearance, the confession, and the trial. The ordinary flow of life, buses, trains, footsteps, was forever altered by the knowledge that safety could be fragile, that silence could conceal tragedy, and that ordinary nights could harbor extraordinary events. Eleanor Brooks' story, once a fragment of uncertainty, had become a defined narrative. It was both cautionary and memorial, demonstrating the persistence of truth over silence, the necessity of diligence, and the consequences of neglect. Cold cases were no longer dormant, they demanded recognition, patience, and courage. And when finally addressed, even decades later, they reshaped understanding, memory, and the very fabric of the city itself. Even as London returned to its daily rhythms, the story of Eleanor Brooks lingered, a quiet but persistent presence threading through streets, stations, and alleys. Ordinary routines now carried the weight of memory. Commuters glanced over their shoulders, shadows in the underground seemed more present, corners of familiar streets felt charged with awareness. The city had not changed in structure, but its consciousness had shifted. Eleanor's disappearance, once a distant tragedy, had become a living lesson in vigilance, patience, and the fragile boundary between the ordinary and the catastrophic. For her family, life continued under the shadow of her story. Anniversaries, previously marked by unanswered questions and speculation, now bore the weight of truth. Every recovered item, the scarf, the bag, the fragmented personal papers, served as a tactile link to Eleanor's life, transforming absence into a tangible reality. Grief coexisted with relief, sorrow interlaced with acknowledgement. The narrative provided form to what had been amorphous pain. They could mourn definitively, no longer suspended in decades of uncertainty. Investigators, emboldened by the confession and modern forensic successes, reflected on the broader implications. Cold cases were no longer considered dormant or unresolvable. Eleanor Brooks' story became a blueprint. Overlooked statements needed reevaluation, minor inconsistencies deserved attention, and time could no longer excuse inaction. The case proved that persistence, diligence, and technological advancement could resurrect truth from the shadows, turning long-forgotten files into stories of resolution. The confession itself illuminated the unsettling reality of ordinary interactions turning extraordinary. A minor argument escalated, impatience and pride igniting consequences beyond imagination. The man who confessed had relied on the ordinariness of his life, the city's indifference, and the invisibility afforded by decades of routine. That normalcy, once protective, became evidence of deception, a chilling reminder that ordinary behavior could conceal extraordinary guilt. Media coverage continued, detailing every facet of the case. The confession, the recovered items, the painstaking reconstruction of Eleanor's final hours. Experts analyzed procedural missteps from the past, and praised the modern forensic techniques that allowed decades-old evidence to yield results. The public engaged with a mixture of shock, fascination, and unease, absorbing both the horror of the crime and the relief of eventual resolution. Eleanor's story became a lens through which the city viewed itself, re-examining assumptions about safety, familiarity, and human behavior. Courtroom proceedings, meticulously detailed, reconstructed Eleanor's last movements. From the library to the bus, from the underground platform to the alley, every step was scrutinized. The recovered items, each fiber, each fragment, each trace, formed a narrative too precise to ignore. Jurors absorbed the decades of concealment, the confession, and the corroborating evidence, confronted with a story that had survived time and neglect to demand recognition. The city itself responded subtly. Londoners became more conscious of their surroundings. Commuters moved with heightened awareness. Families ensured that children were accompanied on walks through seemingly familiar neighborhoods. Ordinary spaces, alleys, streets, underpasses, were now considered with the understanding that tragedy could hide in plain sight. Eleanor Brooks' story had altered perception, embedding vigilance and caution into the collective consciousness. Her family adapted to the new reality slowly. Grief persisted, but it carried structure. Every recovered item, every piece of testimony, and every confession detail formed a bridge between absence and reality. The void of unknown years was filled with concrete knowledge. Mourning existed within a framework of truth, allowing reflection and remembrance without the paralysis of speculation. Police departments institutionalized the lessons. Minor anomalies were flagged, statements once overlooked received attention, and evidence, no matter how insignificant it had seemed, was carefully preserved. Eleanor Brooks' case became a reference point for cold case investigations worldwide, emphasizing that perseverance, methodical review, and patience are essential, and that time alone does not erase accountability. The man who confessed experienced the psychological weight of exposure. For decades, ordinary life had served as a mask, providing him with invisibility. But confession, combined with recovered evidence, left him stripped of protection. Guilt, long deferred, pressed upon him relentlessly. He confronted decades of concealment, accountability, and public scrutiny. Memory, long relied upon as a shield, offered no defense. When the guilty verdict was delivered, the city absorbed it with quiet acknowledgement. Justice had been served, delayed but deliberate. Eleanor's family experienced a mixture of relief and sorrow. The truth was finally visible, yet the lost decades could not be reclaimed. London recognized the case as both a cautionary tale and an example of perseverance, the endurance of truth, and the necessity of vigilance. In the weeks after, the story of Eleanor Brooks continued to influence the city. Ordinary spaces remained watched with care. Commuters adjusted routines subtly. Children were accompanied more cautiously, and neighborhoods retained a quiet memory of a life stolen and recovered in narrative. The city had internalized the lesson. Ordinary life can conceal extraordinary events, silence can be weaponized, and vigilance is essential. The recovered evidence solidified Eleanor's narrative. Each fiber, fragment, and personal item was not just proof of guilt. It was a testament to her existence and her story. They bridged absence to reality, allowing her family, investigators, and the public to engage with a past that had been hidden, neglected, or misunderstood. These tangible artifacts carried emotional, social, and procedural significance, ensuring that Eleanor's life, though interrupted, would be remembered. London, moving forward, remained changed in subtle ways. The story of Eleanor Brooks persisted in shadows, echoes, and whispered memories. The ordinary rhythm of life, footsteps on platforms, buses along streets, conversations in cafes, carried an awareness of fragility. Commuters noticed small anomalies, families guarded routines, neighbors observed patterns. The city had absorbed a profound lesson. Cold cases are not dormant. They wait. They persist. They insist on recognition, demanding attention, patience, and courage. Eleanor Brooks' story had evolved from mystery to revelation, from absence to narrative. It became caution, memorial, and guidance. Cold cases, once considered lost or irrelevant, were now recognized as dynamic forces capable of reshaping understanding, behavior, and society. The persistence of truth had prevailed. demonstrating that time delays justice but cannot destroy it. Even within the city's ordinary flow, Eleanor Brooks' presence endured. The memory of her disappearance, the confession, the trial, and the evidence created a permanent imprint on collective consciousness. Ordinary places were forever seen differently. Shadows, footsteps, and spaces carried the weight of her story. London had learned in its own subtle way that safety is never absolute, that ordinary routines can conceal extraordinary events, and that cold cases, patient and persistent, will always demand to be heard. Even after decades, the echoes of Eleanor Brooks' story refused to fade. London continued its relentless rhythm. Buses hummed through streets, trains rumbled beneath, pedestrians flowed like currents, but beneath the familiar pace, attention lingered. Ordinary places now held memory. Alleys where she vanished, station platforms she had crossed, streets she had walked, they were no longer neutral. Every shadow, every footstep, every passing stranger carried the weight of her disappearance and the truth that had emerged only recently. Her family continued to navigate life under the lingering presence of her story. Her sister returned to the Camden apartment repeatedly, confronting spaces frozen in time yet infused with memory. Each recovered artifact, the scarf, the tattered bag, personal papers, became a bridge between absence and presence, a link to the life interrupted. Grief remained persistent and sharp, but relief interwove with it, a fragile bomb. The unknown had been replaced by a defined narrative. The void of 32 years of silence was filled with clarity, horrific yet necessary, and mourning could finally exist within structure rather than speculation. Investigators, inspired by the case's resolution, reassessed cold case practices across the city. Eleanor's story became a blueprint. Minor inconsistencies were preserved and examined, witness statements were no longer dismissed, and old evidence was reconsidered through the lens of modern technology. Time could obscure truth, but it could not erase it. Each discovery, each fiber, each fragment served as a reminder that the diligent pursuit of justice could resurrect narratives once thought irretrievably lost. The confession revealed the banality of escalation. A minor dispute, words spoken in haste, a flicker of anger. These mundane moments had spiraled into irreversible consequences. The man who confessed had relied on the ordinary patterns of life to shield his guilt. Routine had become camouflage. But his concealment could not survive the patience of investigators or the persistence of truth. Ordinary life, in this case, had been a vessel for extraordinary crime, and the eventual unraveling revealed the fragility of perceived normalcy. Media coverage amplified every nuance of the case. Confession, recovered evidence, and meticulous reconstruction dominated headlines. Analysts examined past investigative oversights, applauded modern forensic advances, and contextualized the importance of cold case protocols. The public absorbed the narrative, gripped by both horror and reassurance, the horror of what happened, and the reassurance that truth, even delayed, could eventually prevail. Eleanor Brooks' name became synonymous with persistence, closure, and the endurance of justice. In the courtroom, every detail of Eleanor's final night was revisited. From the library to the bus, from the underground to the alley, the reconstructed timeline left no question unanswered. Recovered items, fibers, personal effects, fragments of clothing, provided tangible evidence bridging decades of uncertainty. The jury, immersed in layers of testimony and corroborating materials, confronted the magnitude of long-hidden crime. Silence that had once protected the perpetrator now became the framework for accountability. The city itself responded quietly but profoundly. Commuters became subtly more vigilant. Families accompanied children with greater care. Familiar spaces, the alleys, the underpasses, the streets, were now considered through the lens of potential danger. Eleanor's disappearance and the resolution of her cold case embedded lessons in vigilance and awareness into the urban consciousness. Ordinary routines were no longer assumed safe. Ordinary spaces could conceal extraordinary events. For Eleanor's family, the resolution brought both clarity and continued sorrow. Grief now had context. Every recovered artifact, every testimony, every confession detail formed a bridge between absence and reality. Decades of uncertainty gave way to truth, allowing mourning to take shape in ways previously impossible. The past, once unknowable, became tangible, painful, and finite. The story of Eleanor Brooks, though horrific, provided structure for processing loss. Law enforcement agencies internalized the lessons. Minor anomalies, previously dismissed, were now flagged and analyzed. Witness statements were preserved, evidence meticulously cataloged. Eleanor Brooks' case became a reference point, demonstrating that persistence, patience, and diligence are essential to justice. Cold cases were no longer inert files. They were living narratives that could reshape procedures, awareness, and society itself. The man who confessed endured the psychological weight of exposure. For decades, the ordinariness of his life concealed guilt, allowing him to pass unnoticed. Now, stripped of routine and secrecy, he confronted the reality of decades-long accountability. Guilt, previously deferred, pressed upon him relentlessly. Memory could no longer shield him. Every statement, every recovered object, every courtroom reconstruction confronted him with a past he could not escape. When the guilty verdict was delivered, London absorbed it with quiet acknowledgement. Justice, delayed but deliberate, had been served. Eleanor's family experienced a mixture of relief and sorrow. The truth had been revealed, but the lost decades could not be returned. The case became both a cautionary tale and a testament to the persistence of truth, illustrating that vigilance, patience, and thorough investigation are not optional but necessary. In the weeks following, the story continued to influence the city. Commuters remained aware of their surroundings. Families adjusted routines, paying closer attention to spaces previously considered ordinary. Eleanor Brooks' disappearance and the subsequent resolution reshaped perception, embedding caution and vigilance into the city's collective memory. Shadows, footsteps, and corners carried the weight of her story, a constant reminder that ordinary life could conceal extraordinary tragedy. Recovered evidence reinforced the narrative. Each fiber, fragment, and personal item served as proof, but also as a symbol of Eleanor's life. These artifacts allowed her presence to exist, even after decades of absence, and created a bridge between her family, the investigators, and the city. The story no longer existed only in memory or speculation. It had form, weight, and meaning. Even as London's rhythms persisted, the story endured. The ordinary flow of life, footsteps on platforms, trains moving through tunnels, conversations in cafes, carried Eleanor Brooks' legacy. Cold cases, once dormant, were now recognized as persistent and demanding. They wait, they insist, they challenge investigators, families, and communities. And when finally addressed, even decades later, they shape memory, perception, and society itself. Eleanor Brooks' story had evolved from uncertainty to revelation, from absence to narrative, from mystery to cautionary guidance. It became a memorial, a blueprint, and a symbol of perseverance, diligence, and the endurance of justice. London, forever altered, continued to listen. Even after the verdict, London remained quietly changed. The streets, alleys, and underground platforms where Eleanor Brooks had once walked, vanished, or been concealed now carried a new weight. Ordinary spaces, once taken for granted, became infused with memory, caution, and awareness. Commuters moved with subtle vigilance, families walked children with heightened attention, and the city's rhythm, though outwardly unchanged, had absorbed a persistent lesson. Danger can hide in plain sight, and ordinary life can conceal extraordinary events. For Eleanor's family, the months following the trial were a mix of reflection and quiet mourning. The apartment in Camden became a site of memory and confrontation. Every recovered item, the scarf, the tattered bag, fragments of her life, served as a link to Eleanor, allowing her presence to be felt even after decades of absence. Grief was still sharp, still raw, but it was anchored in truth. The narrative of her life, interrupted and restored in fragments, allowed mourning to take a tangible form. Memories could now be reconciled with fact, rather than lingering in the fog of uncertainty. Investigators revisited every stage of the case, drawing lessons for current and future operations. Cold cases were no longer dormant files. They were active narratives demanding attention, patience, and precision. Overlooked witness statements were reevaluated, minor anomalies investigated, and old evidence re-examined through modern techniques. Eleanor Brooks' case became a reference for the persistence required to uncover truth. The message was clear. Time may delay justice, but it cannot erase accountability, and no detail is too small to matter. The confession had revealed a horrifying reality. Ordinary moments, trivial disputes, and fleeting frustrations can escalate into irreversible tragedy. The man who confessed had relied on the ordinariness of his life for concealment. Routine became camouflage and time became an accomplice. Yet no amount of ordinariness or delay could shield him from accountability once evidence and truth aligned. The narrative exposed the fragility of normalcy and the hidden potential for darkness within it. Media coverage highlighted the persistence of investigators, the advances in forensic science, and the emotional journey of Eleanor's family. Public fascination was paired with unease. Headlines emphasized the decades-long concealment, the confession, and the meticulous reconstruction of Eleanor's final hours. The city absorbed these stories, learning that even the smallest details, a fiber, a footprint, a fragment of a bag, could carry the weight of justice. Eleanor Brooks became more than a case. She became a symbol of persistence and the endurance of truth. Court proceedings meticulously reconstructed Eleanor's movements. The library, the bus, the underground platform, the alley. Each step was scrutinized, each object recovered, each fiber examined. The jury absorbed the depth of decades-long concealment, the confession, and the corroborating evidence. Silence that had protected the perpetrator became the framework for accountability. Every small detail became a vital piece of narrative clarity. London itself absorbed lessons quietly. Commuters moved with awareness, families adjusted routines, and ordinary spaces became scrutinized through the lens of caution. The story had reshaped perception. Shadows, corners, and passing strangers were no longer neutral. Eleanor Brooks' disappearance and the subsequent resolution reminded the city that ordinary life can hide extraordinary consequences. Vigilance was no longer optional, it became instinctive. For Eleanor's family, the narrative provided structure to grief. Each artifact, every recovered item, every courtroom revelation formed a bridge between absence and reality. Decades of uncertainty transformed into a defined narrative. Mourning could now exist within a framework of truth rather than speculation. The past, once unknowable, became concrete, painful, and finite. The story allowed the family to reclaim Eleanor in memory and meaning, even if the life she could have lived remained lost. Law enforcement internalized the implications. Minor anomalies were preserved and scrutinized. Witness statements, once dismissed, were now treated as crucial pieces of the puzzle. Eleanor Brooks' case became a reference point for modern investigations, demonstrating that patience, diligence, and persistence are essential, and that cold cases, even after decades, can be solved. Every fragment of evidence mattered. Every overlooked lead could hold the key. The man who confessed experienced the psychological weight of exposure. For decades, the ordinariness of his life concealed guilt. Now stripped of routine and concealment, he confronted the full consequences of decades-long secrecy. Guilt pressed relentlessly. Memory could no longer protect him. Every recovered object, every courtroom testimony, every investigative detail forced confrontation with a past he could no longer hide from. Accountability was absolute, inescapable, and immediate. The guilty verdict, delivered in solemn acknowledgement, resonated quietly through London. Justice, delayed but deliberate, had been served. Eleanor's family felt relief, sorrow, and closure interwoven. The truth had emerged, replacing decades of uncertainty. The city recognized the case as both cautionary and instructional, demonstrating the power of persistence and the endurance of truth. Even months later, Eleanor's story continued to influence London. Commuters remained aware of their surroundings, families guided children with care, and ordinary spaces were scrutinized in new ways. Her disappearance and the resolution of her cold case embedded lessons in vigilance, memory, and the necessity of patience. Shadows, corners, and footsteps carried her story. London had learned that ordinary life could conceal extraordinary danger, that silence can be weaponized, and that cold cases, patient and persistent, will always demand to be heard. Physical evidence recovered decades later provided tangible proof, bridging the gap between absence and reality. Fibers, fragments, personal items, they were more than forensic tools. They were symbols of Eleanor's life, of the decades-long quest for truth, and of accountability finally realized. Her story, once uncertain, now existed with clarity, shaping the memory of the city, her family, and those who pursued justice tirelessly. Even in ordinary rhythms, Eleanor's presence endured. The lessons of her disappearance, the confession, the trial, and the evidence created a permanent imprint on collective consciousness. Ordinary routines, footsteps on platforms, trains moving through tunnels, conversations in cafes, carried a quiet awareness. Cold cases wait, persist, and insist. They demand recognition, vigilance, and courage. When addressed even decades later, they reshape understanding, perception, and society itself. Eleanor Brooks' story had evolved from a fragment of uncertainty into a defined narrative, from mystery into memorial, from absence into cautionary guidance. Her name became synonymous with persistence, diligence, and the endurance of justice. London, forever altered, had absorbed the lesson. Vigilance is essential, ordinary life is fragile, and the truth, patient as it may be, cannot be silenced forever.